When racist FBI agents burst into an innocent woman's hotel room, they had no idea who was in front of them. Their careers and futures are in jeopardy. What happens when the agents learn the truth about their victim? Subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching this from. Justin could feel the weight of expectation settle onto his shoulders as he stepped into the briefing room of the FBI's Washington, D.C. field office. The morning sun barely filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the room filled with serious faces and hurried movements. It was just another day at the Bureau, but today had a different energy, something in the air that suggested this assignment wouldn't be like the others. The briefing was already underway as Justin took his seat near the front. His partner, Agent Mark Turner, an older man with a distinguished gray streak in his hair and a face lined by years of service, sat next to him. Mark had been in the Bureau for nearly 20 years and was known for his no-nonsense attitude and firm stance on what he saw as traditional American values. Justin admired Mark for his dedication, but had also learned to share some of his partner's views, especially the unspoken but deeply ingrained skepticism toward anyone who wasn't like them. "Listen up," began Special Agent in Charge Bill Davidson, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "We have an urgent situation at the Marriott Royale. A suspect connected to a known criminal organization is believed to be staying there. We need results quickly. This could be a high-profile case and the Bureau's reputation is at stake." Justin's attention sharpened at the mention of the Marriott Royale, a prestigious luxury hotel that wasn't known for harboring criminal elements. The mere thought of a suspect hiding in such a place seemed out of place, almost laughable. However, the assignment carried an air of danger that piqued his interest. "As far as we know, the suspect is unidentified, and we only have intel that suggests they may be connected to a recent smuggling operation. Your job is to go in, observe, and, if necessary, apprehend the suspect. We don't have a solid description, but we have reason to believe the individual is skilled at blending in. Stay alert," Davidson continued, fixing his gaze on Justin and Mark. "I'm putting you two on this. I expect you to get it done." The room seemed to buzz as the agents dispersed, but Justin could only think of the words, "blending in." His mind automatically linked that phrase with people who didn't belong in places like the Marriott Royale. "Seems like a waste of time to be checking up on luxury hotels, doesn't it?" Justin said to Mark as they exited the briefing room. Mark chuckled, the sound devoid of any real humor. "You'd be surprised, kid. I've seen all kinds of people try to hide out in places like that. You know what to look for, just trust your gut, and don't be afraid to be a little assertive." The unspoken meaning behind the word was clear to Justin. As they made their way to the car, Mark continued to elaborate on the task, mixing standard procedural advice with subtle but unmistakable suggestions. "Look, Justin, there are patterns to this kind of thing. Some people just don't fit in certain places. You and I both know it," he said with a knowing glance. Justin nodded, his mind already racing with the possibilities of who the suspect could be. Despite being relatively new, he had heard enough from his partner about the usual types that didn't belong in upscale environments. The assumption lingered like a stain on everything they did. In his mind, the assignment became not just a matter of catching a criminal, but of confirming what he had always believed to be true. As they drove toward the hotel, the city's bustling streets seemed to fade into a blur. Justin's thoughts were elsewhere, considering the possibilities, imagining the suspect's face, picturing how the operation would unfold. He thought of his partner's advice. Trust your gut. His gut told him that people who didn't fit the profile would stand out, and he was prepared to act on that intuition. The Marriott Royale loomed ahead, a towering structure with elegant architecture and pristine landscaping. The entrance was lined with polished brass and a red carpet, giving it an air of exclusivity. Bellhops moved swiftly to and from the door, greeting arriving guests and handling their luggage with a practiced finesse. As the two agents approached the main entrance, Justin couldn't help but feel a slight thrill at the thought of getting to the bottom of the case. Inside, the lobby was a picture of luxury, with marble floors, glittering chandeliers, and plush furnishings. The soft hum of conversation mixed with the quiet elegance of classical music playing in the background. Everything about the scene exuded wealth and privilege. For Justin, it also served as a reminder that certain people were out of place here, and he felt the task of identifying such individuals would be straightforward. As they scanned the lobby, Mark's gaze settled on a particular guest, a black woman standing near the reception desk, apparently checking in. Her presence seemed to jar with the surroundings. She was dressed well enough, but something about her calm, self-assured demeanor made Mark narrow his eyes. "See that?" Mark whispered to Justin. "Something doesn't feel right about her." Justin looked over at the woman, taking in her appearance. She seemed relaxed and completely unbothered, as if she belonged there as much as anyone else. But in the back of his mind, Justin couldn't shake the feeling that his partner might be right. After all, a suspect who knew how to blend in would certainly project confidence. "Let's keep an eye on her," Justin said, trying to sound decisive, even though part of him wasn't sure if they were on the right track or just following a hunch that had nothing to do with actual evidence. Mark's face broke into a satisfied grin. "Now you're getting it," he said. "Trust me, you'll learn to spot the ones who don't belong soon enough." The woman moved away from the desk and headed toward the elevators. Without a word, Justin and Mark fell in step behind her, keeping a casual distance as they followed her into one of the corridors. She was unaware of their presence, but the tension in the air seemed to build with every step. As they walked, Justin felt a surge of anticipation, mixed with a slight unease. What were they really expecting to find? He glanced at Mark, who gave a barely perceptible nod. There would be no turning back now. The hallway stretched out ahead, a quiet corridor lined with ornate wall sconces casting a warm glow over the patterned carpet. As the woman walked further from the bustling lobby, the noise faded into an uneasy silence. Justin and Mark followed her with a practiced subtlety, maintaining a distance that kept them just out of her line of sight. Justin's pulse quickened as they moved deeper into the hotel. He kept his eyes fixed on the woman's back, noting the way she carried herself, completely at ease, as though she had every right to be there. There was no sign of nervousness or hesitation. To Justin, that in itself seemed unusual. "Did you see that look she gave the receptionist?" Mark whispered, breaking the silence. "Like she thought she owned the place. That kind of arrogance can only mean trouble." Justin nodded, glancing briefly at his partner. Mark's expression was one of thinly veiled disdain. To him, there was no question. They were on the right track. For Justin, however, a shadow of doubt lingered, but he pushed it aside, allowing Mark's confidence to bolster his own. It was their duty to follow through, to make sure that they didn't let any potential threat slip away simply because they hesitated. The woman stopped in front of a room and pulled out a key card. She glanced over her shoulder once before swiping it through the lock and pushing the door open. Justin and Mark exchanged a look. It was now or never. Mark stepped forward, his voice steady and commanding. FBI, we need to speak with you. The woman turned, a frown crossing her face. Excuse me, she said, the surprise in her voice genuine. What is this about? Without answering, Mark moved closer, and Justin followed, standing just behind him. We're investigating a situation here, ma'am, Mark continued, his tone losing its polite edge. You need to come with us for questioning. Questioning? She repeated, incredulous. What for? I haven't done anything. Just cooperate, and this will go smoothly, Mark said, a hint of impatience creeping into his voice. He took another step forward, and she instinctively backed away, her calm demeanor giving way to visible unease. This is ridiculous, she muttered, her tone steady but laced with frustration. I'm a guest here. You have no right to... Before she could finish, Mark reached out and grabbed her by the arm, pulling her roughly away from the door. The woman stumbled slightly, and Justin saw a flash of anger in her eyes as she righted herself. Let go of me, she said, struggling to keep her voice level. I don't know what you think you're doing, but you're making a big mistake. Justin watched the scene unfold, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and discomfort. There was no evidence against her, but something about the way she challenged them made him feel justified in the action. The lines between suspicion and prejudice blurred, and he found himself leaning into the moment, adopting the same aggressive posture as his partner. Mark shoved the woman into the room, slamming the door shut behind them. The abruptness of it sent her reeling, and she stumbled onto the bed. She quickly regained her composure, glaring at the two agents as they loomed over her. This is an illegal detention, she said, her voice rising. You can't just storm into someone's hotel room without any cause. Mark scoffed, his lip curling in a sneer. Oh, we have plenty of cause, lady. Don't play innocent. You're here for a reason, and we intend to find out what it is. The woman's eyes narrowed. You're accusing me of something because I'm black, aren't you? You think I don't belong here? Justin felt a prick of annoyance at her words, even though part of him knew there was truth in what she said. He didn't respond, letting Mark handle the situation. His partner had a way of controlling moments like these, forceful, unyielding. Listen, Mark said, his tone dripping with condescension. We know how people like you operate. You come to places like this thinking you can get away with anything, but we see right through it. That's absurd, she snapped back, standing up from the bed. I'm here on legitimate business. Mark's eyes flashed with irritation. Sit down. We're not finished with you. For a moment, she held his gaze defiantly, but then she slowly sat back down, her hands resting on her knees. Justin could see that she wasn't intimidated. She was furious. It was a look he had seen before, one that defied the authority they wielded. Start explaining, Mark demanded. Who are you here to meet? What's your connection to the recent smuggling operation? The woman shook her head, disbelief etched across her face. Smuggling? I don't know what you're talking about. I have no connection to any criminal activity. Mark didn't let up. He moved closer, looming over her. You can deny it all you want, but your little act doesn't fool me. We'll get the truth out of you sooner or later. Justin stepped forward, deciding it was time to add his voice to the interrogation. Why don't you tell us why you're really here? He asked, trying to sound as authoritative as Mark. There's no use lying. She looked between the two of them, her expression a mixture of anger and resolve. I don't owe you any explanations, she said coldly. You're harassing me for no reason. Mark reached into his pocket and pulled out a pair of handcuffs. Then, I guess we're doing this the hard way, he said, taking a step forward. Before he could reach her, the woman raised her voice. "Enough!" she shouted. "I don't know what twisted agenda you're working under, but you're not going to get away with this." The forcefulness of her voice seemed to catch Justin off guard, making him hesitate for just a second. Mark, however, was unfazed. He lunged forward and roughly yanked her out of the chair, spinning her around to restrain her wrists. "This is completely illegal," she shouted as she struggled against him. "You can't just come in here and—" "Oh, we can, and we did," Mark replied, his tone as dismissive as ever. "Now shut up and cooperate, or it's going to get a lot worse for you." Justin felt a flicker of doubt rise within him, but it quickly drowned in the adrenaline pumping through his veins. His partner had set the pace, and now it was his responsibility to follow through. With the woman cuffed and detained, the next step would be to search the room. They needed some kind of evidence to justify their actions, or at least to claim that they had acted in good faith. As Justin moved toward the bathroom to begin his search, he glanced back at the woman. She was glaring at him, a silent accusation burning in her eyes. For a moment, he felt as if she could see right through him, through the facade of authority, and into the uncomfortable truth that he didn't want to acknowledge. Justin stepped into the bathroom, scanning the room for anything that could be used as evidence. The tiled walls gleamed under the bright lights, and a faint scent of lavender hung in the air, but there was nothing suspicious in sight. No hidden compartments, no contraband, just the typical amenities one would find in a luxury hotel. The emptiness of the search left him feeling oddly unsatisfied, as though he needed to find something to justify their actions. Back in the main room, Mark had pulled the woman up from the bed and was aggressively questioning her, the intensity of his tone growing more severe with each passing moment. "We know you're hiding something," he said, his voice hard and cold. "If you don't start talking, things are going to get much worse for you." The woman, still in handcuffs, stood with her shoulders squared, refusing to cower. "I don't have anything to say to you," she shot back, her voice defiant. "This whole situation is a violation of my rights." "Your rights," Mark scoffed. "You forfeited those the moment you became a suspect." Justin emerged from the bathroom, shaking his head slightly to indicate that there was nothing there. "Room's clear," he said flatly, trying to conceal the frustration in his voice. Mark glanced at him, a shadow of annoyance flickering across his face. It was as if the lack of evidence only fueled his anger, making him even more determined to find something, anything, that could justify their actions. He turned back to the woman with a grim expression. "What are you hiding?" he demanded, his eyes boring into hers. "Who are you working with?" The woman let out a short, bitter laugh. "You're making a mistake," she said. "I'm not involved in anything illegal. I told you already, I'm here on business." "Business, huh?" Mark's tone dripped with sarcasm. "What kind of business could someone like you possibly have at a place like this?" She glared at him, her jaw tightening. "That's none of your concern. You have no reason to keep me here, and you know it." Mark's face darkened, and he stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "You think you can talk to us like that? You think you're above the law just because you're staying in a fancy hotel?" The tension in the room grew thick, and Justin could feel it wrapping around him, squeezing tight. Part of him wanted to step in, to remind his partner that they had no real grounds to hold her. But another part, the part that had learned to trust Mark's judgment, that had absorbed the Bureau's culture of always asserting control, kept him silent. "We're done playing nice," Mark said, grabbing the woman by the arm and pulling her toward the bathroom. "Let's see how talkative you are when we step things up a notch." She resisted, her feet digging into the carpet. "Let go of me," she spat, trying to wrench her arm free. "This is harassment, plain and simple." "Oh, you don't know the half of it," Mark replied, dragging her inside and pushing her toward the sink. He flipped on the faucet, letting the water run as he continued to hold her in place. Justin followed them in, the small space suddenly feeling even more claustrophobic. He watched as Mark leaned in close to her, his voice a low growl. "This can go one of two ways," he said. "Either you start telling us what we want to know, or you're going to have a very unpleasant day." "I don't know anything," she shouted, her voice echoing against the tiled walls. "You're doing this because of my skin color, because you think I don't belong here. That's the only reason." Mark's grip tightened, and his expression twisted into a sneer. "People like you always play the race card," he said. "It's not going to work here. We're not your average security guards, we're federal agents. We know when someone's lying." "Then do your job," she shot back, her eyes blazing with fury. "Investigate properly instead of harassing innocent people." The challenge in her voice only seemed to make Mark angrier. He turned the water pressure up, letting the cold stream cascade down. "Maybe a little shock to the system will loosen your tongue," he muttered. Justin felt a knot form in his stomach. This wasn't what he had signed up for. At least, that's what he told himself. But here he was, watching his partner push the boundaries of their authority and doing nothing to stop it. He had learned early on in his career that loyalty to your partner came first, and now that belief kept him rooted to the spot. Mark pushed the woman's head closer to the running water, not yet letting it touch her, but making his intentions clear. "Last chance," he said. "Talk." "I'm not telling you anything," she said through gritted teeth, her voice steady even as her eyes darted toward the faucet. "Because there's nothing to tell. I haven't done anything wrong." Justin saw the defiance in her eyes, the way she refused to back down, even though she must have been terrified. A part of him almost admired her composure, but it was quickly overshadowed by the frustration of knowing that she wasn't giving them what they wanted. Mark pulled her away from the sink, roughly pushing her against the bathroom wall. "You think you're tough?" he hissed. "Let's see how long that lasts." Justin stepped forward, placing a hand on his partner's shoulder. "Easy, Mark," he said quietly. "We don't need to do it this way." Mark shrugged off his hand, his gaze snapping toward Justin. "What's the matter? She's got you feeling sorry for her?" He shook his head, turning back to the woman. "You're wasting our time, lady. If you're innocent, then prove it." "I don't need to prove anything to you," she said. "You're the ones who need to prove why you're here, barging into my room without a shred of evidence." Her words hung in the air, a challenge that Justin knew they couldn't meet. Not because they lacked the authority to detain her, they could always make the case sound reasonable later, but because deep down, even he was starting to see that they had nothing. No real leads, no legitimate reason to hold her. Just an instinct based on little more than prejudice and arrogance. The moment of hesitation was all it took for the woman to regain some control of the situation. She straightened up, her chin held high, and looked directly at Justin. "You know this is wrong," she said. "You don't have to keep going along with it." Justin's jaw clenched, the accusation stinging in a way he hadn't expected. He opened his mouth to respond, but Mark spoke first. "Enough with the moral high ground," he snapped. "You're not going anywhere until we get some answers." But before Mark could resume his aggressive questioning, there was a loud knock at the door, followed by the sound of voices outside the room. "What's going on there?" a voice called out, sharp and authoritative. "Open up." Mark's eyes darted toward the door, a flicker of alarm crossing his features. "Stay here," he barked at Justin, then stormed out of the bathroom to deal with the interruption. Justin turned back to the woman, who was watching him with a mixture of contempt and pity. "This isn't over," he muttered, more to himself than to her. But even as he said the words, a sinking feeling told him that it was the beginning of the end. As Mark stormed out of the bathroom to address the interruption, Justin remained standing near the woman, his nerves on edge. The air in the small bathroom seemed stifling, and the harsh fluorescent lights only made the tension feel more oppressive. He could hear Mark's muffled voice on the other side of the door, exchanging terse words with whoever had knocked. The woman, still handcuffed, took a deep breath and seemed to regain her composure. She turned her gaze toward Justin, her expression firm but controlled. "You're violating my rights, and you know it," she said. "You don't have any real reason to detain me." Justin felt a stab of irritation. There was something about the way she looked at him, as if she were questioning not just his actions, but his very character. He straightened his shoulders, trying to project authority. "We're doing our job," he replied flatly. "You were acting suspiciously, and that's reason enough to investigate." "Suspiciously?" She raised an eyebrow. "By checking into a hotel? Or is it just that you think I don't belong in a place like this?" Justin bristled at her accusation, but before he could formulate a response, Mark re-entered the room, looking agitated. "Some hotel staff," he muttered to Justin. "They're nosy, but I sent them away. We need to wrap this up before they start causing more problems." He turned his attention back to the woman, his irritation morphing into something colder and darker. "You're really starting to test my patience," he said, stepping closer to her. "I'd suggest you start cooperating before we have to take this to the next level." The woman's chin lifted defiantly. "You can threaten me all you want, but it won't change the fact that I haven't done anything wrong." Mark's eyes narrowed, and a dangerous smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "We'll see about that." He grabbed her by the arm and began pulling her back toward the main room. Justin followed, feeling an uneasy mixture of frustration and something akin to shame. Part of him wanted to say something to de-escalate the situation, but he couldn't bring himself to contradict his partner. Back in the main room, Mark shoved the woman into a chair, his expression hardening. "You think you're clever, don't you?" he said, his voice laced with contempt. "Playing the victim card, acting all indignant, like that's going to make us back off." "It's not an act," she replied calmly. "It's the truth, and if you had any integrity, you'd recognize that." Mark's face flushed with anger. "Enough," he snapped. "We're not here for a debate. You're going to answer our questions whether you like it or not." Justin watched as his partner took out his phone and began to record the interaction. "For the record," Mark said, holding the phone up, "state your full name and explain what you're doing here." The woman looked directly at the camera, her voice steady. "My name is Samantha Gray," she said, "and I'm here on business, as I've already told you. I don't see why you're detaining me when I've done absolutely nothing suspicious." Mark lowered the phone, a mocking smile on his face. "Samantha Gray, huh?" he repeated, as if the name were some kind of punchline. "And I suppose you expect us to believe you just happened to book a room at one of the most expensive hotels in the city." "Yes," she answered, meeting his gaze without flinching, "because I own this hotel." There was a moment of stunned silence as her words hung in the air. Justin felt his pulse quicken, the ground beneath his certainty shifting. He glanced at Mark, whose initial shock quickly morphed into disbelief. "Is that so?" Mark sneered, folding his arms across his chest. "You expect us to believe you own this place? That's a good one." "It's the truth," Samantha replied, her tone as calm as ever. "If you bothered to do any actual investigating, you'd know that." Mark's smile faded, replaced by a cold glare. "I've had enough of your games," he said, his voice dropping to a threatening murmur. "You think throwing around some story about being a hotel owner is going to get you off the hook? I don't buy it for a second." "Of course you don't," she said, her voice steady but edged with bitterness. "Because people like you don't believe that someone like me could actually be successful." Her words struck a nerve, and Justin saw the flash of anger that passed through Mark's eyes. In an instant, Mark reached out and yanked her to her feet. "You need to watch your mouth," he growled, "or things are going to get a lot worse for you." As Mark's grip tightened, Justin felt a surge of unease. He could see that Samantha was not backing down, her gaze unwavering despite the clear threat in Mark's actions. The longer this went on, the more it felt like they were losing control, not of her, but of the situation itself. The line between enforcing the law and abusing their power was becoming dangerously blurred. "Mark, that's enough," Justin said, his voice firmer than he intended. "We don't need to take this any further." Mark glanced at him, a look of incredulous irritation on his face. "What's gotten into you?" he snapped. "She's playing us, and you're falling for it." "I'm not falling for anything," Justin replied, forcing himself to stay calm. "But we're not getting anywhere by pushing her like this. Let's just step back and—" "We're not stepping back from anything," Mark interrupted, his voice rising. "We're doing what needs to be done. Or have you suddenly forgotten why we're here?" Justin felt his jaw tighten. He didn't want to argue with his partner in front of the suspect, but he could see that things were spiraling out of control. Samantha's defiant gaze hadn't wavered, and in that moment, he saw not just resistance but a quiet, stubborn strength that refused to be broken by their intimidation tactics. "Fine," Justin said tersely, taking a step back. "But we need to get some confirmation on her identity. If she's lying, we'll know soon enough." Mark released Samantha's arm with a rough shove. "You better hope you've been telling the truth," he said, his tone dripping with disdain. "Otherwise, you're going to regret every word that came out of your mouth." Samantha's expression didn't change. "I'm not the one who's going to have regrets," she said softly. Mark scoffed and turned away, pulling out his phone to make a call, likely to verify her claim. As he paced the room, his voice low and frustrated, Justin watched Samantha closely. Despite the circumstances, she had maintained her composure, even as the situation escalated to the point of physical aggression. There was something unsettling about the way she stood there, as if she were entirely unafraid. Justin knew that if her story checked out, they would have a lot of explaining to do. For the first time, a small voice in the back of his mind questioned if they had taken things too far, if their initial assumptions had blinded them to the truth. But before he could dwell on it, Mark ended his call and turned back to the room, his face pale with a mix of disbelief and fury. "She's telling the truth," Mark said through clenched teeth. "She is Samantha Gray, owner of this hotel." The words hit Justin like a punch to the gut. All of a sudden, the weight of their actions came crashing down on him, leaving him momentarily breathless. Samantha's defiant stare now felt like a silent accusation that he could no longer ignore. The room seemed to shrink in an instant. the luxurious furnishings and soft lighting suddenly feeling oppressive as the reality of the situation hit Justin and Mark. The silence hung heavy in the air as Justin tried to process what Mark had just said. Samantha Gray was indeed the owner of the hotel. Justin looked at Samantha, who stood tall despite the rough treatment she'd endured, her expression a mixture of quiet satisfaction and simmering anger. Her calm composure had never wavered, even in the face of Mark's aggression, and now it was clear why. She had known all along that they were in the wrong. "You've made a big mistake," Samantha said, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Mark's face flushed with fury, his fists clenching at his sides. "Don't get smug," he snapped, trying to recover some semblance of authority. "We're still investigating suspicious activity here. Just because you own the place doesn't mean you're above the law." Samantha's gaze didn't falter. "The only suspicious activity here is what you two have been doing since you barged into my room," she retorted. "You abused your power, and now you're trying to cover it up." "Watch your tone," Mark growled, taking a step closer to her. "You're not out of the woods yet." But Justin could see that the situation had already shifted beyond their control. His partner's usual bravado now came across as desperate bluster, a last-ditch attempt to maintain the upper hand. For the first time, he felt the full weight of the consequences pressing down on them. They had crossed a line, and there would be no easy way back. "Mark," Justin said quietly, his voice betraying the uncertainty that gnawed at him, "we need to think this through. If she really is who she says she is, then—" "She is," Mark interrupted, his voice tense and unsteady. "But that doesn't mean we're backing off. We've come too far to just walk away." Justin's stomach twisted at his partner's words. It was true, they had already gone too far, but the difference was that Mark seemed determined to double down on their mistake, while Justin could no longer ignore the sinking feeling in his gut that told him they were in deep trouble. "Maybe it's time we just admit we got this one wrong," Justin said, his voice barely above a whisper. He glanced at Samantha, whose expression remained resolute. "Let's cut our losses and leave before we make it even worse." Mark rounded on him, his eyes blazing with anger. "Are you kidding me? You're just going to let her walk away after she disrespected us? After everything we've done?" Justin flinched at the venom in Mark's tone. "It's not about her," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "It's about us doing our job the right way. We overstepped, and now we need to own up to it." But Mark wasn't listening. He turned back to Samantha, his face set in a mask of barely controlled rage. "You think you can just waltz in here and pull the wool over our eyes?" he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Well, guess what? You're not walking out of here until I say you can." "That's where you're wrong," Samantha said coldly, "because you're not the one in control anymore." Justin could feel the tension in the room rising to a breaking point, the atmosphere charged with the threat of further confrontation. He stepped forward, placing a hand on Mark's shoulder in a vain attempt to calm him. "Mark, this isn't helping," he said urgently. "We need to step back and let this go." Mark shrugged off Justin's hand and took another step toward Samantha, his aggression only increasing. "I don't care who you think you are," he hissed. "You're going to answer for the way you've been acting." Before Mark could get any closer, the door to the hotel room burst open, and several hotel staff rushed in, led by the hotel's general manager. "What is going on here?" the manager demanded, his voice sharp with authority. He was an older gentleman with silver hair and a stern expression that made it clear he was used to being in charge. The interruption stopped Mark in his tracks. He spun around to face the hotel staff, his expression shifting from anger to thinly veiled annoyance. "This is an official investigation," he said, his voice harsh. "You need to step back and let us do our job." But the general manager was undeterred. "I don't care what kind of investigation you think you're running," he said, his tone unyielding. "You have no right to detain Miss Gray without evidence or cause. I've already called the police, and they'll be here any moment." The words seemed to hang in the air, stripping away the last remnants of control that Justin and Mark had over the situation. Justin felt a chill run down his spine as he realized that the entire ordeal was rapidly unraveling before their eyes. The manager's calm, authoritative presence made it clear that this was no longer a matter of two FBI agents conducting an investigation. It was a matter of protecting the hotel's reputation and, more importantly, the rights of its owner. "This isn't over," Mark muttered under his breath, glaring at the hotel manager before turning to Justin. "Let's get out of here." Justin hesitated, looking at Samantha one last time. Her defiant stare hadn't wavered, and now it was accompanied by a hint of satisfaction, as if she were silently saying, "I told you so." "Come on, Justin," Mark barked, his frustration boiling over. "We're leaving." Without another word, Justin followed Mark out of the room, his thoughts racing. It wasn't just that they had been caught in the act of overstepping their authority. It was the realization that their actions had been driven by prejudice and arrogance. The entire assignment had been a cascade of bad decisions, each one compounding the last until it had led to this. As they made their way down the corridor, Justin couldn't shake the feeling that something in him had shifted irreparably. He had always prided himself on being a by-the-book agent, someone who could be relied upon to uphold the law without letting personal biases interfere. But today, he had been forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. He wasn't as impartial as he thought. "Don't let her get to you," Mark said, his voice harsh and dismissive. "People like her will say anything to make you doubt yourself." But Justin wasn't sure if it was Samantha who had made him doubt himself, or if it was something deeper, something that had been there all along, waiting for the right moment to make itself known. As they reached the hotel's exit, the sound of approaching sirens echoed in the distance. Justin felt a hollow sense of dread settle in his chest. The fallout from this incident would not be easily contained. There would be questions, investigations, and consequences, and for the first time in his career, Justin wasn't sure if he was ready to face them. The sirens grew louder as Justin and Mark exited the hotel, their sharp wails cutting through the crisp evening air. Outside, a pair of police cars pulled up to the entrance, red and blue lights flashing in rapid succession. The officers stepped out of their vehicles, their expressions a mixture of urgency and concern, and began making their way toward the hotel. Mark kept walking, not breaking his stride as he headed for their car. "Let's get out of here before they start asking too many questions," he said through clenched teeth. Justin hesitated, glancing back at the hotel's front doors, where he saw the general manager speaking with the arriving officers, gesturing toward the entrance as he recounted what had happened. The weight of what they had done hung heavy on Justin's shoulders, and each step toward their car felt like a retreat, not just from the scene, but from the responsibility they had so carelessly ignored. As they reached their vehicle, he noticed that his hands were trembling, his pulse still racing from the adrenaline. The reality of their situation was beginning to sink in. They had crossed a line, and there would be no erasing the damage. Mark opened the car door and got in, his jaw tight with barely suppressed rage. "Let's go," he barked, his tone leaving no room for argument. Justin got in the car reluctantly, and as he shut the door, he glanced in the rearview mirror at the hotel behind them. Samantha Gray was standing just outside the entrance, speaking with the officers and the general manager. She glanced in their direction, her expression unreadable, but Justin could sense the accusation in her gaze, a silent reminder that they had not only failed in their duty, but had violated her rights and dignity in the process. As they drove away, Mark gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. "We need to get ahead of this," he said, his voice tense with urgency. "We'll report back to Davidson. Give him our side of the story before anyone else does." Justin didn't respond immediately. He was still processing the events of the past hour, and it was becoming harder to ignore the gnawing guilt in his gut. "And what are we going to tell him?" he finally asked, his tone hollow. "That we detained a hotel owner without evidence and made fools of ourselves?" "We tell him that she was acting suspiciously," Mark snapped, his eyes flicking toward Justin as if daring him to disagree. "We stick to our story. It's her word against ours, and we have the authority on our side." But Justin wasn't so sure. He had seen the way the general manager had reacted, the look in the eyes of the hotel staff who had gathered outside the room. It wasn't just Samantha who was accusing them. There were multiple witnesses now, people who would be more than willing to report what they had seen. "Mark, we made a mistake," Justin said quietly, his voice heavy with resignation. "We pushed too hard, and now it's coming back to bite us." Mark shot him a look of disgust. "Don't start losing your nerve now, Justin," he said. "We just need to ride this out and make sure our version of events is the one that sticks." The words made Justin's stomach turn. For years, he had thought of himself as one of the good guys, someone who was committed to upholding justice and protecting the innocent. But now, in the aftermath of what they had done, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were the ones in the wrong, that they had become the very thing they were supposed to stand against. They drove in silence for several minutes, each lost in their thoughts. Justin's mind raced with possible outcomes, each one more daunting than the last. He knew that when they returned to the bureau there would be questions that he wasn't sure he could answer without implicating himself and his partner. The following day, Justin and Mark were called into a meeting with their superior, Special Agent in Charge Bill Davidson. The air in the conference room was thick with tension as the two agents took their seats, facing Davidson across the table. His expression was unreadable, but the way he tapped his pen against the table suggested his patience was wearing thin. "I've received some troubling reports," Davidson began, his voice calm but edged with a warning tone. "Apparently, 2 of my agents forcibly detained a guest at the Marriott Royale last night, a guest who, as it turns out, owns the hotel. Would either of you care to explain how that happened?" Mark leaned forward, his face composed but determined. "Sir, the situation was more complicated than that," he said. "We had reason to believe that the suspect was involved in criminal activity. She was acting evasively, and given the information we had at the time, we proceeded as we thought necessary." Davidson's gaze shifted to Justin, who felt his throat tighten. "Is that true, Agent?" he asked, his tone piercing. Justin hesitated, a silence stretching out for what felt like an eternity. He thought back to the moment in the hotel room when he had first seen doubt in Samantha's eyes, the moment he had realized that they were in over their heads. And now, here he was, being asked to lie about it, to rewrite the story in a way that would absolve them of wrongdoing. "We followed protocol as best we could, given the circumstances," Justin said, hating the way the words sounded as they left his mouth. It was a half-truth at best, and even as he said it, He could see the skepticism in Davidson's eyes. "I've spoken with the hotel's general manager," Davidson said, his voice dropping an octave, "and with Miss Gray's attorney, who was quite adamant that the Bureau's actions were not only unlawful, but racially motivated. Now, I'm giving you both the chance to explain yourselves fully. Did you or did you not overstep your authority?" Justin's heart raced, the walls of the conference room closing in around him. He glanced at Mark, whose jaw was set, his expression daring him to contradict the story they had agreed on. But something inside Justin had snapped. He couldn't keep pretending that everything they had done was justified. "We overstepped," Justin said quietly, the confession spilling out before he could stop it. "We acted on a hunch, and we let it get out of hand." Mark's eyes widened in shock and fury. "What are you doing?" he hissed under his breath. Davidson's face remained impassive, but Justin could see the faintest hint of surprise in his eyes. "Thank you for your honesty, Agent," he said. "I'm initiating an internal review into this incident. You'll both be placed on administrative leave pending the outcome." As Davidson dismissed them, Justin felt a strange sense of relief wash over him, mingled with a deep shame. He knew that by admitting the truth, he had jeopardized not only his career, but his partnership with Mark. As they left the room, Mark turned to him, his voice low and venomous. "You just threw us both under the bus," he said. "You're no better than her." Justin didn't respond. He couldn't. Because in his heart, he knew that Mark was right. They weren't any better. And now they would have to face the consequences of their actions. In the weeks that followed, news of the incident at the Marriott Royale spread beyond the confines of the Bureau. Samantha Gray's story made headlines, drawing attention to the broader issue of racial discrimination within law enforcement. She became a symbol of resilience against abuse of power, speaking out about her experience and the need for systemic change. As for Justin, he spent his days on administrative leave reflecting on the choices he had made, the biases he had allowed to influence his actions. The review board would eventually determine his fate, but the real punishment came in the form of his own self-reckoning. He knew that whatever happened next, he would never see the world in the same way again. The line between right and wrong had blurred, and now he was left to pick up the pieces of a career built on the belief that he was one of the good guys. For the first time, he wasn't sure if that was true. Samantha Gray's defiance had exposed the cracks in his conviction, forcing him to confront a reality that he had been too proud or too blind to see. And as the dust settled, he realized that acknowledging his mistakes was only the beginning. There would be a long road ahead if he ever hoped to make things right. But whether or not that was possible, only time would tell. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new stories. Click on the bell to be notified of fresh releases. Leave a comment and tell us what you think. And of course, check out our other videos. Your opinion is important to us, and we welcome every new viewer. See you in the next video.